Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight we're going to be sports intensive with two sports figures, a brief profile and then a longer profile. We're going to start out tonight with gorgeous Gussie Moran, who died recently at the age of 89. Her name is pretty much forgotten today, but in 1949 she was the talk of the tennis world at Wimbledon. Female tennis players at Wimbledon are generally noted for two things: their play and their dress. Even today with the Williams sisters or Anna Kournikova, they talk about their outfits as much as their play. Gussie Moran was from Southern California, and she was a very good tennis player, but she wasn't the best female tennis player in the world. She was the 7th ranked American at the time. She never won Wimbledon, but because of what happened in 1949, she actually garnered a mention in this British documentary on the greatest tennis players of the first half of the 20th century.
Gorgeous Gussie Moran, a good tennis player, is perhaps better known for her clothes.
Moran asked the former tennis player Teddy Tinling, who was now a clothes designer, to design something for her at Wimbledon, and he came up with a white silk sun-top jersey, a tight waist and bodice, a short skirt that boldly bared her knee, and underneath were matching white silk jersey panties trimmed with 2 inches of open lace. The lace panties were scandalous at Wimbledon. Here's what the Guardian said about the fuss over Gussie Moran's clothes. The Williams sisters in their cling film costumes are the latest in a long line that began in 1919 when the French superstar Suzanne Lenglen sent shockwaves around center court by provocatively baring her forearms in a dress that reached to just below her knees. Worse still were the rumors of lipstick. But even this wanton display did not prepare Wimbledon for the events of 1949, when gorgeous Gussie Moran appeared in a dress designed by Teddy Tinling, which came complete with matching lace-trimmed pants. For her second-round match with Betty Wilford, press photographers fought one another for a pitch that allowed them to lie down and take worm's-eye shots of the notorious knickers. The crowd were enthusiastic, and the Prime Minister Clement Attlee, in a moment of almost Blairite populism, complimented Tinling on the outfit. Others took a dimmer view. One committee member told Tinling, a serial offender, a pair of his gold lame pants designed for Carol Figueroa were banned in 1958. "You have put sin and vulgarity into tennis." Fears were expressed that Gussie's gussets could have a detrimental effect on the health of the 82-year-old Queen Mary, who was expected to attend some of the finals. Well, the Queen survived, tennis survived, Wimbledon banned short skirts the next year. It would be years before they'd allow short skirts at Wimbledon again, but eventually they came back. Gussie Moran had a brief movie career. She was in Pat and Mike with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. She had an unhappy life after that, but she changed women's fashions in tennis, and for a brief time she was the biggest name in the sport. Gussie Moran wound up dying penniless, but ponder what might have happened if they'd had television and the marketing they have today. Gussie Moran likely would have been a media superstar and a multimillionaire. We're going to move on now to Earl Weaver, our main feature, and Earl Weaver died recently at the age of 82, and I say with great confidence that he was the smartest baseball man I ever saw in my lifetime. No one, bar none, knew more baseball than Earl Weaver. You'd have to go back to people like Casey Stengel and John McGraw. He was the successful manager of the Baltimore Orioles, which you'll hear about. He converted Cal Ripken from third base to shortstop when everybody else in baseball thought it was a crazy idea. And he knew the Moneyball concepts way before you ever heard of Bill James, Billy Beane, or Michael Lewis. In addition, he was pugnacious, and his fights with umpires were legendary. But I don't want that to take away from the brilliant man that he was, which happened in a lot of the obituaries. They emphasized his fighting rather than his brilliance. One of the things that shows you how good he was he got his own segment on the Ken Burns series on baseball.
In the middle of the 1968 season, the Baltimore Orioles got themselves a new manager, Earl Weaver, a former minor league second baseman who never learned how to hit. It was the beginning of one of the most successful managerial tenures in the modern age. Weaver was a brilliant psychologist. He loved debate umpires to inspire his team. And he was thrown out of 91 games, a major league record.
Don't think I won't. No finger. You do it again and I'll knock you right in your nose. I didn't touch you. You pushed your I did not. No, you're lying. You're lying. No, you are lying. You're a big liar. You are a liar. You're a liar. You are. You had your hands on me. No, that's wrong, Earl.
Under Weaver's leadership for 14 full seasons, the Orioles would win or come in second 12 times, win 4 pennants and 1 world championship.
Just want to throw this in. We can't play too much of Earl Weaver directly talking on the field because we bleep out everything. If David Mamet had created a baseball manager as a character, trust me, it would have been Earl Weaver. As the segment mentioned, not only was he tactically brilliant, but he was a great psychologist. One of the things that didn't get played up in his story was that before he went into baseball, he was a used car salesman. He knew people. He knew how to motivate them, and he knew how to evaluate talent, and he picked every player and played to their strengths rather than their weaknesses. Unlike so many managers, he was probably the best platooner since Casey Stengel. One year he platooned 2 marginal players as left fielders and got 38 home runs and 99 RBIs out of them, which would have been an all-star season for one player. But don't just listen to me, listen to some brilliant baseball people. Here's Tim Kurgian from ESPN, who is probably the #1 baseball commentator in the sport.
He's one of the 3 greatest managers of all time. He's a Hall of Famer. Obviously, he won 90 or more games 11 times. He won 100 games 3 years in a row. 1969 through 71, he averaged 106 games won per year. And on the bus, when they left Kansas City after a rare loss in 1970, he kind of crackled from the front row of the bus. He said, "Damn, it's hard to stay 50 games over 500. That's who Earl was, and I can tell you, David, in 33 years of covering baseball, I've never learned more from anyone in uniform than I learned from Earl Weaver. And it wasn't just pitching and defense and 3-run homers. It was the simplistic way and yet brilliant way that he looked at the game. He hated to bunt because he told me many times, he said, they only give you 27 of these outs. Don't give any of them away. And when the other team would bunt against his team and his pitcher didn't throw a strike, he would scream at his pitcher, "They're giving us an out. Throw it over the plate." And that was Earl. He was, again, so brilliant in everything that he did. He was so far ahead of everyone else. I've never met anybody who was sharper in the running of a baseball game than Earl Weaver. He was feisty and pugnacious beyond words. I mean, he was a little guy. He was a limited player in the minor leagues, and he kind of wore that on his sleeve for his entire career. But his thought was, I'm going to get this right, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take on the umpires. And interestingly, I was covering the team in '86 when Earl had one of those famous blow-ups with an umpire, and his dad was in the clubhouse after the game. And his dad essentially said that he did not like the way his son had yelled at the umpires and thought he'd made a fool of himself, and Earl never argued with an umpire again. Only I know that story. But he was absolutely legendary for taking on the umpires, and the umpires ultimately were afraid of him because they knew that he was smarter than everyone else. And I can also tell you that when he argued with umpires like that, the entire crowd in Baltimore went absolutely crazy. And it was like something that fired up the team. But he didn't do it to fire up the team. He did it to protect his players and make it right, because things had to be right for Earl Weaver.
One of the things you should know is that when he gave his Hall of Fame speech, the first people he praised were the umpires. Here's a pretty fair baseball man, George Will.
Earl Weaver was what a manager ought to look like. Short, angry, florid, impatient, and tempered, a character.
Will, of course, wrote a book about Tony La Russa, but sorry, Tony La Russa wasn't in the same league as Earl Weaver, and I don't mean national and American. Here's Roger Angell, a nonpareil baseball writer for The New Yorker for many decades.
When you talk to Earl Weaver, he would put you right in the middle of the baseball situation that you wanted to talk about as a writer, and he would tell you everything that was involved. And usually when he was doing this, he would be stark naked in his office and eating like a chicken or something like this, but a little pint-sized man with no clothes on, talking baseball with his eyes all alight. Wonderful.
And finally, Tom Boswell for the Washington Post, who's the best baseball writer in America today. He wrote a book with Earl Weaver called It's What You Learn After You Know It All Accounts. It is the best baseball book I ever read.
I'll always remember Earl sitting in the dugout before a game with a cigarette cupped in his hand like a little boy sneaking a smoke, and his fingers all yellowed by the smoke, telling a story and not realizing that they were playing the national anthem. And after the national anthem, I apologized. I'm sorry I'm still here. And he turned to me and he said, "Relax, kid, don't worry. We do this every day."
Weaver was Boswell's Johnson, and I'm going to read to you what he wrote after Weaver died. It's beautiful. In the 1970s, when female reporters were first allowed in baseball locker rooms, I was leaving Earl Weaver's office one night after his smart, sarcastic postmortem of a tough Orioles defeat. I realized that the only woman on the beat, a relative newcomer, had missed Weaver's performance. Entering his office as we all left, she looked worried. Weaver dressed down reporters for dumb questions and at times demanded what you would have done and why before he would give his answer. His office was sometimes a funny place, but also electric with tension. Baseball spoken here. Eavesdropping's a clubhouse sin, but I wanted to see how cruel Weaver might be. To that point, I'd never met anyone in baseball with much grasp that a female journalist had every right to be there. So, Weaver said businesslike, do you want it all or just the highlights? As he started repeating his best answers as she wrote. Earl Weaver died Saturday at 82. Whatever you think, you're right. But he was probably also to some degree the opposite as well. Whenever you assumed he was a man of his time, defined and limited by immersion in his sport, he often showed he was ahead of his time and also frequently ahead of his sport. In death, we will see images of his tirades at umpires, be reminded of his fun wisecracks, and of his sense of strategy that predated several Moneyball theories by a generation. We will see a hard, smart man with a Chesapeake crab shell, little social polish, and a need to overcompensate for his lack of size and ability as a minor league ball player. We all saw that. But in 9 years of covering the Orioles beat, I saw another Weaver, one that doesn't contradict the first, but rather broadens him. He didn't open up often, but when he did, you were floored. He knew himself, why he was who he was, and why he managed the way he did, as well as anyone I ever covered. We knew he had examined baseball and hadn't missed much. But he'd also examined himself and analyzed in detail everyone around him too. The distance Weaver kept from his players with no desire whatsoever to be their friend, but rather to be their leader, was his defining trait to me. That distance gave him authority and made every day at the park feel just a little bit dangerous. What would Earl do? What might he not do if he felt like it? No contemporary team, in my experience, was on its toes in the sense that Weaver's Orioles always were. Reggie Jackson only played one season for Weaver, but said, "I love the little Weave. If you made a mental mistake, you saw him waiting for you on the top step of the dugout when you came back in. He'd just say one word, why, and you better have an answer. On his team, if you didn't think the game, you have a problem." He was right in your face. We were all on speaking terms. We all have a little rapport, but not too much, Weaver told me, regarding his relationships with his players. You learn the first day in Class D, the lowest rung of minor leagues, you're always going to be a rotten bastard, or in my case, a little bastard, as long as you manage. That's the rule. To keep your job, you fire others or bench them or trade them. You have to do the thinking for 25 guys, and you can't be too close to any of them. Weaver never allowed managing to be a pleasure to him. It was work. And while he loved a loose, goofy clubhouse with characters and hijinks, one where you argued and let off steam one day, then started fresh with clean air the next, he never pretended to be a friend to anyone except his coaches. Every star he ever had except Brooks Robinson ended up denouncing him, refusing to believe it was the end when it came to their careers. That strain of being a true authority figure is perhaps the main reason his career was so short. He retired at 53, was begged and bribed back, but retired for good at 56. Two other reporters and I sat in the dugout one evening in the 80s before a game when Weaver began ruminating on how he returned, but couldn't fix the team and knew it and should quit. Then he said he had to go and see the general manager, and he left. Did Earl just decide to retire, we asked each other, and he had. For Weaver, the strain of the game was his certainty that he was often one of the few adults in the room. You must remember that anyone under 30, especially a ball player, is an adolescent, he once told me. I never got close to being an adult until I was 32. Even though I was married and had a son at 20, I was a kid at 32 living at home with my parents. Sure, I was a manager then, but that doesn't mean you're grown up. Until you're the person that other people fall back on, until you're the one that's leaned on, not the person doing the leaning, you're not an adult. You reach an age when suddenly you realize you have to be that person. Divorce did it to me. Could be elderly parents, children, anything. But one day you realize, it's me. I've got to be the rock. Finally, he got sick of being that rock, never showing his players how much he cared about them, always being the adult bringing bad news. No manager ever yearned for retirement more than Weaver. I know exactly what I need to live on. I have since 1957. I'm always going to do the same things. I grow my own vegetables. I stuff my own sausages. Pork shoulders will be coming on sale next month. I look for chuck roast on sale to use and stew or grind it up for hamburgers, Weaver said. Doing all that takes time, and I enjoy it. I'll have plenty of money to play golf every day, run out to Hialeah or the dogs, take wife Marianne out to dinner in Fort Lauderdale, and take a walk on the beach. I don't want to spend my whole life watching the sun go down behind the left field bleachers. Weaver's Orioles were always amazed that he retired so young, stayed in Florida, and always seemed content, especially compared to the constantly wired Earl of Baltimore whenever they saw him again. They assumed he was worried about his health or didn't want his ritual post-game drinking to unwind after games to get the better of him. What they missed was his wisdom. One of his owners, the distinguished lawyer Edward Bennett Williams, talked constantly about competition living and how little else mattered. Weaver looked at him amused and grew tomatoes in the bullpen. Many will remember him for his wins, his arguments, and his quips. I gave Mike Cuellar more chances than my first wife. Or on seeing slumping Al Bunbury heading to chapel services cracking, take your bat with you. He never met an authority figure in a blue ump's uniform or a general manager's office or a state trooper's cruiser that didn't bring out the hellraiser in him. That's Earl. But there was plenty more. He thought about everything in baseball with a unique freshness, as if it was unexamined before he arrived. He loved to analyze the psychology of his players, adding every new detail to his mental portrait. And in a game where consistency is worshipped, he actually enjoyed changing his mind, reworking the puzzle. Why, we asked him. Because everything changes everything, he said. And now that he's gone, even more so. Very nice, huh? Here's a personal note. His last game with the Orioles in his successful stint was a loss to the Brewers on the last day of the season, which cost his team the pennant. They'd come from way back and made a gallant run, but fell one game short. I was a big Brewers fan, but even I felt sad, and here's Howard Cosell to describe his last game at Memorial Stadium that season.
You are bearing witness to one of the most remarkable scenes, maybe that you will ever see in sport. Yes, the fans have stayed. They have stayed to cheer and to honor the retiring manager of the Birds of Baltimore, a man who in 15 years has become an absolute legend. The defeat will hurt. There's Harvey Keene over to congratulate him, and Earl Weaver is crying, and you can understand it. Very rarely has there been a scene like this, if ever. And there they are standing and chanting, all of them in unison. And the sign says it all. Earl, and you deserve it. You've been one of the greatest managers in the history of the game.
For once, Howard Cosell wasn't overstating. I got to play one Earl Weaver description of an umpire fight, and you see what a funny guy he was. In his career, he was ejected 97 times, but as he liked to point out, that was less than one a month.
The thing there was he had missed a play in the previous year's World Series. It was when Armbruster bunted and ran into Fisk. The umpire got it in place of interference. He called it obstruction. At any rate, he got the play wrong.
Sure.
We had the same umpire in Cleveland the following year. The same play came up with my player and one of the Cleveland players. I ran out on the field. I said, "Now, Larry, you missed it in the World Series. You're missing it here." He said, "No, I didn't miss it in the World." I said, "I'll go get the rule book, and we'll see who's right." He said, "No, you don't. You're not bringing no rule book out on the field." Well, my third base coach, Billy Hunter, had already got it. He was on his way out with it. I started to open the pages, and he said, "Earl, you open that page, you're out of here." I said, "Well, I figured that." He said, "I don't care what that book says anyway. We're playing by my rules." And I said, "Well, if we're playing by your rules, there ain't no sense in us having this book." So I started tearing it up page by page and throwing it on the field.
Brilliant, funny, and one of a kind. One of my favorite Earl Weaver stories, he had a pitcher named Dave Leonard. He told him to warm up before a World Series game one time. Leonard said, "I'm really impressed, Skip, you're thinking of using me to pitch in the World Series." And Weaver said, "You're not going to pitch in the World Series. I just want Palmer to see you and pitch better." Pioneered the use of the radar gun and kept note cards with statistics before there were computers. On top of that, he had an ongoing contest with the Baltimore grounds crew guy as to who could grow better tomatoes in the bullpen. I'd also recommend his Manager's Corner pregame radio broadcast segment where he talks about Alice Sweet. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. Again, Earl Weaver, one of the most influential men in my lifetime in baseball. And to honor the great manager of the Baltimore Orioles one last time, we're going to have great jazz singer Nina Simone sing her song about Baltimore.
Oh, Baltimore.